Building Consensus through Regional Cooperation. The session will discuss perspectives towards building synergies between India and Southeast Asia in such as perspectives on the Indo-Pacific. To chair the session, I have the pleasure to invite Professor Suthiphand Chirathivat, Professor Emeritus, Chulalongkorn University, long-time good friend. And Professor Chirathivat, are you there? Can we see you? Can you switch on your video? Yeah, we can listen to your voice.
I am here. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's nice.
There's a bit
Then we
echo
have,
from my side.
yeah, we have 4 speakers. Dr. Anupama Devendra Kumar, she's a senior lecturer at Wien University. We have Dr. Ravichandran Moorthy, Associate Professor, International Relations and Strategic Studies, National University of Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur. From India, we have Professor Sanjay Pulipaka, Independent Researchers on International Politics and Security in Hyderabad. Sanjay is already there online, and with me, Dr. Temjenmeren Ao, the Research Fellow, ICWA, New Delhi. So with that introduction, the session is 1 hour, 30 minutes. Speaker will get 15 minutes to speak, present, and then we'll have time to discussion, Q&A. Also to add here that Dr. Anupama won't be able to make it because she is not well. She's hospitalized because of some complications. So we have actually 3 speakers, so we have a little bit more time. And Professor Suthiphand, we are here to support you in the discussions. If there are those who are joined online, I'd request to put your questions in the chat box. If you'd like to speak, also raise your hand. We'll come back to you. So with that, I hand over to Professor Suthiphand to chair the sessions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Prabir. Namaste, Swadee Krap, and good late afternoon from Bangkok. I'm very pleased to share this session. A bit very echo from my side. Could you help to adapt from your side? There's some technical problems. Could you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but your sound is not coming clear, Professor.
I don't know why.
Maybe you would like to use a headphone instead of, you know.
I'm not in my office, so I don't have. Could you hear
Okay. Now? Yeah, we can hear you, but if you bring your mic near to your mouth, maybe the voice will be clear. Otherwise, we can hear you. You can go ahead.
Okay, all right. So I try my best. Well, I think we have a very rich discussion from this morning, inaugural session, now up to the last session we just have had for the coffee and tea break. I think very much in this session, we already known, that India-Southeast Asia relationship is more than 3 decades old. We're taking the 1,000 years of shared history and cultural and people connectivity. So very much we understand ASEAN diversity and ASEAN ambition to build ASEAN unity and centrality, which still remain at the core, and as well as much as we ASEAN member countries, as well as the whole ASEAN, happiness, a good work in progress for their partnership in India up until today. So I think very much in the context of this particularly important 3rd decade of ASEAN-India partnership, we would like to looking forward to how to strengthen and building our relationship and future partnership. of course, we had from the very opening session, and we all aware about the, that's taking the more recent geopolitical shift that we think that have quite strong impact that will reshape our 3 decades of all kind of facet of relationships. So that's why we are here today to discuss how to building what you call the consensual way of ASEAN India in order to moving ahead into the future. I think that in order to help setting the tone for later on for our 3 speakers, I think I have in mind first they should be able to respond about the stock taking of ASEAN-India partnership the last 3 decades, or they would like to take longer view in terms of ASEAN in Southeast Asia relations. Very important to know that kind of stock taking, that kind of relationship up to today. And then on the second point, I think has been discussed very much today about the global and regional changing trend, how they see those kind of trend will impact ASEAN-India relationship, or how that impact India, how that impact ASEAN, so we could have a clear picture how we would like to move to the third point, which is more about the, that's how we would like to moving ahead in terms of moving our cooperation, regional cooperation in different areas, from security down to economic cooperation, down to people and cultural and all sorts of the cooperation on technical side also we could address. With that in mind, I would like to invite each of them. I think I would like to start with Dr. Ravichandran Moorthy, Associate Professor, International Relations Strategic Study, National University of Malaysia. You came from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. You have the floor. I think it's since we have 3 speakers, you can have ample time to address what we would like to talk in this session. Please, Professor Ravichandran, you have the floor.
Mr. You need to unmute yourself. You're not audible. You need to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Sorry. So I was thanking the chairperson for inviting me to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, I think on the outset, I think it's only appropriate for me to thank Professor Pravil D, all right, for this kind invitation. And also special thanks to the ASEAN India Center at RIS and also ICWA for organizing this important conference. Excuse me, let me mute my phone. All right. I'm going to, not use the video because the internet connection from the place I'm speaking is not that good. So I don't need picture. So I'm going to stop the video and I'll have audio presentation. So thank you. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think the theme of the conference is indeed timely, right? Because we are at the moment facing some major changes, right, in the shift in the geopolitics of the region, originating from the recent power dispute between the US and Russia that is already posing severe problems, not only to the power configuration in the region and beyond, but also on many other aspects, such as the economy, more recently, the food security problem, and also the energy crisis. It appears that the whole world will be impacted by this problem, this crisis, one way or the other. In addition, if we were to look at closer to the region, we find that there are also rising powers in the likes of India, China, and other middle power nations in Southeast Asia, are also having interactions and confrontations, right, in various disputes around the region, whether it is on sea or land. All right. So this suggests a sense of fluidity in the geopolitics of the region, which requires better scrutiny and also better management. Okay. And of course, a maritime country like Malaysia, the dynamics of the adjacent sea, which is the Indian Ocean, is always a concern. And the Malaysian policymakers and also the diplomats, they watch closely what's happening in that region. I've been given 15 minutes to speak, so therefore I will focus on the theme, which is the challenges and building synergies between ASEAN and India. All right. So for this, I think I will take on about 4 or 5 points. I will try to explain what are the issues, as what are the areas that for future collaboration or better synergies between the two regions, ASEAN and India. If we were to look at Southeast Asia, it was well documented by the previous session that Southeast Asia and India has shared ethno-religious and socio-cultural bonds through trade, through conquest, through migrations for centuries. Okay, and prior to the arrival of Islam in this region in the early 15th century, it was the Hindu-Buddhist traditions that dominated the archipelagic Malay world through government structures, ideas and philosophy, religious pursuits, and also civilizational influences. Now, India already has a base for greater engagement, not only through colonial connections, but also through a vibrant diaspora communities, namely in countries like Malaysia, in Singapore, Indonesia, and also Thailand. Now, one of the points that I'd like to raise here is to revitalization of the diaspora relation. We have seen in the past decade or so, there has been greater interest by the Indian government with regard to diaspora relations. Okay, but it was only until recently. All right. The diaspora relation has been seen by India as quite problematic. In fact, some countries also see this closer relation between India. We call it Mother India and the sons of who are residing in other shores as problematic. Okay, especially when these newly independent countries in Southeast Asia go towards the process of nation building and citizenship. However, in the past decade, I think the diaspora engagement has been quite active, especially from the Indian side. The BJP government has been quite proactive in engaging people or people of Indian origin who have resided in countries in other parts of the world, in many parts of the world, including Southeast Asia. Now, the point I'd like to make here is, despite this, all right, the Indian initiatives, I think, are only limited to religious and cultural, and more towards on its own parochial economic interests. All right, I think, yeah. So it is cultural and also religious, and much of it is on economic interests, without much consideration to the Indian issues in these countries. Okay, so I think the Indian engagement with the diaspora population should not be based only on one-sided, because people in Malaysia and in other parts of the world, especially those who are first generation and second and third generation of Indian migrants, feel that the India is not paying close attention to them as what China is doing to other parts of their diaspora. I think that is one point. The second point I would like to make is also in terms of one point that was raised by the previous session is the lack of engagement, the lack of serious engagement in terms of scholarships, in terms of people-to-people interaction. I know that one of the points, rather the strategic areas that India wanted to focus with regard to Malaysia at least, was in the area of people-to-people interaction. But I don't see that happening as much, other than some sporadic book reviews, book launches, and one or two, function that involves politician. There is no serious involvement of India with regard to the people in the diaspora. So that's point number one. Point number two is from the perspective of policy engagement. We know that the India's Look-East policy took shape in the early 1990s, in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the Cold War. All right. So India went through a very interesting period. Not only India, but all the other countries also went through this interesting period, at the end of the Cold War, with regard to their foreign policy adventurism and also their, flexibility in engaging other countries other than their traditional partners. So India introduced a lot of reforms, liberalization in a more substantive and sustained manner. All right, the LEP, which is the Look-East policy, formalized India's engagement with ASEAN, and was driven primarily by the boom of economic growth in Southeast Asian countries. So India was very much interested to be partners with, especially with the countries which are growing very rapidly in the 90s and early 2000s. A decade after formalizing ties with ASEAN, India became ASEAN summit-level partner in 2002 and established a strategic partnership with the regional organization in 2012. Then, of course, it came the renaming of LEP with a more vigorous posturing in the Act East policy came about in 2014. And that served as a renewal and reinforcement of India's interests and objectives in ASEAN. By that time, India-ASEAN ties covered economic, security, cultural, as well as connectivity. But having said that, well, over the years, economy was the important aspect of the partnership. But however, maritime security, right, also emerged as an important facet in the relationship. Having said that, I think there could be more, India could do more in terms of engaging Southeast Asia, not only in the traditional security, military dimension, but also and also in the economic front, but also in other aspects of engagement. I think some of the areas was mentioned by the Singaporean High Commissioner in his opening remarks during the inaugural session today. I think the areas that India has prowess and there is a great demand in Southeast Asia are in the area of emerging technologies, right? In the area of new energies, the area of resource management, right? Resources management, including water, energy, and things of that sort. Medicine and public health is a major concern, at this pandemic, post-pandemic, I think we are not in the post-pandemic yet. We are still in a pandemic period. There is a resurgence of cases in Malaysia and in many countries in Asia. So I think the expertise of India is very much appreciated and welcome in other countries in Southeast Asia. And these are some of the areas that India can go in and look at joint collaboration. I think that's point. The other point is this is actually the soft power which I'm talking about. It's not really Bollywood and all that. That is one aspect of it, all right? But India should improve on the ideological, not only ideological, but also the intellectual assets that they have, and see how that could match with the demands in Southeast Asia. Okay, point number two, or rather point number three, I would like to make is pertaining to and also the Asia-Pacific leadership vision. Now, we know that India has rendered ASEAN a central role in the Indo-Pacific leadership vision. And we know that, it is gaining traction in Southeast Asia. The construct of Indo-Pacific slowly gaining traction since the mid-2000s. And ASEAN became a focus area for power play. So Indo-Pacific, to my mind, is seen as a natural extension of the Asia-Pacific. Yeah, then of course, when you look at the geographical part, as what Raja Mohan was mentioning, we are now right smack in the middle of the new demarcation, of the new geographical demarcation. That has become increasingly strategic for other major players like the US and also the allies, including India and Australia and Japan. Now, the closer presence of China within the India-Ocean region, all right, the Indian Ocean region seems to have necessitated this conceptualization, as all of us are aware. ASEAN has become a central in the equation both geographically and also strategically, since it is an important region for trade, manufacturing, and business services. The region's security is of importance to all the major powers as well. India also ensured that it will support the concept of ASEAN centrality that has continued in the Indo-Pacific vision by indicating that it aspires a leadership role in the partnership within ASEAN. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here I think there is a different uptake, or rather acceptance level, between countries in ASEAN. Different countries have different understanding of the concept, different concerns and hesitations as well. I remember just before the pandemic here in Malaysia, in one of the conferences organized by the Maritime Institute, and it was officiated by the then deputy defense minister. So he came up, he said that no need for this Indo-Pacific, and he said that now let's look at Asian, all right? So he was more concerned about, but of course, he's no longer in power. But there is a different level of embracing this particular concept. But having said that, I think many countries, including Malaysia, I think will continue to have a low-key position while observing the dynamics within the region, how it is transforming. Okay, the more aggressive, the more assertive China becomes, especially in the South China Sea or in other areas of concern, then probably the acceptance rates of many countries in ASEAN will be better. But I think in terms of in terms of the values, like for example, the values of freedom of navigation, openness, and all these values which is reflected in the Indo-Pacific is actually an acceptable values by, in fact, all of the ASEAN countries. If not all, most of the ASEAN countries, Point number 3 or 4, which I'm trying to make is, it's a question, in fact. Why has India not better utilized ASEAN, despite the long engagement that India has with Southeast Asia, as a strategic leverage and to heighten its global standing, right? So this is a research question, puzzle for a PhD student. All right. Why has India not better utilized ASEAN? All right. If you were to look at it, if you compare other major powers, specifically China have a larger footprint in Southeast Asia compared to India. Okay. Now, I think one of the reasons is India faces many challenges within that continue to determine its ability to engage ASEAN. All right. Now, India's own challenges pertaining to opening up of its economy, like for example, it struggles with its uncompetitive industry sectoral sectors that are very dependent on its large domestic market, sensitive agriculture sector that employs a large proportion of its population, which is acceptable. Then the second point, if we would look at ASEAN as well, ASEAN is not although it is a regional organization, but in Southeast Asia, each of these countries are diverse, all right? They're diverse in many sense in terms of development, politics, national interests. And these aspects were further complicated by the individual states' ties within the regional partner, all right? And i.e., the presence of other major powers in the region as well, especially China and the US. Now, as I mentioned to you, China has a larger footprint in ASEAN countries. Malaysia is the biggest receiver of China's trade. Malaysia is the largest trading partner, China's largest trading partner in ASEAN. So, China's position in Malaysian politics, it's quite important. Of course, as you know that the Belt and Road initiatives, right, has arrived in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia. Malaysia also have, in the process of completing certain projects with regard to the rail and regard to projects and seafront activities and whatnot. India as a strategic partner is an important strategic partner to ASEAN, all right, and especially in the HADR and also in the maritime security framework. I think that importance has gained prominence over the last few years, especially with India's linkages with countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and also with Singapore. Nevertheless, I think India's integration with ASEAN in terms of economy through its FTA continue to face many issues, right? And most recently is India's withdrawal from RCEP in 2019. I think these are some of the areas of concern, all right? One more point I would like to make is, the problem I see that for India to deal with ASEAN, especially the Muslim majority ASEAN countries, namely Malaysia and perhaps Indonesia and Brunei, is the rise of nationalism or nationalistic posture in India has been seen quite badly by this country, especially the Muslim majority country. And there's a lot of resentment, especially in my country, all right? So the following point I would like to make, this is the last point, is how to build the synergies with ASEAN, all right? And I'll just give you some of the pointers in my own thinking. I think point number one here is I think there is a need to review the existing partnership, right? And the intended, and review the India-ASEAN FTA. It will be a good step in that direction, so that economic complementaries could be found, especially in relation to India's strength in the services sector. I think this is one area that India could promote, cooperation. On the part of ASEAN, I think ASEAN also needs to assess its partnership with India against the backdrop of India's strategic role in the region and within the context of the Indo-Pacific. Okay, maritime security partnership with the Quad, as well as the now Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. I think there is also more room for expansion in the defense cooperation, as we've seen with the India-Philippines BrahMos deal. So with India's strengthening of indigenous defense industry, ASEAN states could, in the long run, find in India a wider scope of defense equipment and technology-related partnership. And this is one area that India and ASEAN could work together. Then, of course, in leveraging on the growth of the diaspora community I mentioned earlier, there could be further facilitation in both sides on travel visas, touristic and cultural activities. Similarly, in the area of education, research centers that focus on India-ASEAN relations. Okay, I think these are some of the points that I like to make. And I think I will end here, then perhaps we can speak during the Q&A session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi, for bringing all the important issues well, which is very much of recent development and address many parts that could be improved in terms of synergy with ASEAN and India could also come into why we building a partner relationship. I think I have a few things that perhaps you can keep in mind. You know that while you talking about the, you know that it's true that without India, ASEAN will not come easily in terms of ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific, while we try to build some kind of consensus among us when we have that ASEAN outlook Indo-Pacific. But without the India support, we will not be that part. But again, the question about the future of how because we discussed, I think, also from this morning, because it's very much not only India, you also have the India is inside the Quad for security, and you know as well you know that the American just proposed IPEF, you know, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is also I don't know how India see what the ASEAN could do or how India would like to react on that kind of framework. As well as you see this the recent visit, you know, because the ASEAN will host 3 summits this year. The ASEAN summit itself and East Asia summit and all the summit with strategic partners include India, be hosting Phnom Penh, Cambodia by the end of the year. And Indonesia will host the G20. That's also quite important. So how India look at the G20, that's quite important. You know, the meeting, the summit that Indonesia as host, looking forward to also all participation, particularly in. Last but not least, also we will have in Bangkok APEC meeting, Asia Pacific Cooperation, which is not Indo-Pacific, of course. All more than 20 leaders, economies will attend that particular meeting. So all these important change in ASEAN this year, you know, on the summit. I think I don't know how you see also from Malaysia. Other issue I think is you rightly point out that ASEAN is quite diverse. ASEAN is not a bloc, so dealing with, of course, with the ASEAN as a whole and as an individual countries, there are some kind of different. I think India recognized very well with India, for example, relationship with diaspora. You mentioned with Malaysia or Singapore or with Thailand. At the same time, you just mentioned that Malaysia also have a heavy stake with China in terms of trade and investment. So taking Malaysia as an example, how that kind of thing. I mean, that's you could say for other ASEAN countries, you could also extend to other ASEAN countries. I think I'm not going to be more than that for this round, but I'd like to ask our second speaker, Dr. Sanjay Pulipaka from International Politics and Security. I think he's a more independent researcher on this kind of issue. He's from Hyderabad. Yes, Mr. Dr. Sanjay Pulipaka, please have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Let me at the outset thank the leadership of Indian Council for World Affairs and ASEAN India Center at the RIS, specifically Prabir Day, for this invitation to participate in the conference. And of course, thanks to the Chair for coordinating the conversation today. These conversations assume importance because this constitutes the 30 years of India-ASEAN relationship, and it provides a good opportunity to map the road ahead. The session title is very interesting in my opinion. It talks about building consensus through regional cooperation. In politics, more specifically in international politics, consensus is often sought but is often elusive. And sometimes it is also seen with an element of skepticism. Given the hierarchical power relations of international politics and the possibility of crude power that is often deployed, consensus sometimes is seen as the opinion of powerful, which has been accepted by not so powerful. On the other hand, consensus is also deeply valued in various regional frameworks precisely because of hierarchical power relations. By engaging the big powers through regional frameworks and through the process of consensus, the voice of relatively powerless or the relatively less powerful countries gets celebrated. The Southeast Asian countries under the rubric of ASEAN have worked out consensus building processes within the region. Decisions within ASEAN are taken through consensus. As a consequence, voice of all the players, irrespective of how big or how small they are, get represented. Of course, there has been criticism that overemphasis on consensus has given an option for one country or the other to prevent the organization from taking a proactive stand on pressing regional and international political issues. On balance, it should be admitted that the consensus building process has ensured cohesion within ASEAN. Of course, we can critically evaluate the role of consensus building and the utility of consensus in a fast changing geopolitical context, which I may refer to a little later. The session theme also prompts us to explore a notion of consensus, not just within ASEAN, but also between India and ASEAN. There can be what I call big consensus and small consensus. Big consensus involves agreements on overarching economic and political issues. On the other hand, small consensus could be consensus on how to move forward in a given project or in a given sector. I'll explore these dynamics in three sectors. First, the regional conceptions. At a conceptual level, there is growing consensus between India and ASEAN on the need for larger regional frameworks. While there were apprehensions in some ASEAN countries regarding the Indo-Pacific, over time, ASEAN has issued ASEAN Outlook for Indo-Pacific, I think in 2019. The outlook listed principles such as centrality, openness, transparency, inclusivity, and so on, which will guide its engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. These principles align with India's principles articulated by Indian Prime Minister in Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018. For India, the Indo-Pacific region extends from the eastern coast of Africa to the Pacific coast of United States. This vast region cannot have a single overarching architecture. It requires multiple frameworks. In fact, the ASEAN Outlook for Indo-Pacific recognizes this and mentions the need for building synergies between ASEAN and other regional frameworks such as BIMSTEC and Indian Ocean Regional Association. Given its location, ASEAN will perform the function of building synergies. As was pointed out in the morning, by default, ASEAN becomes an important pillar in the regional architecture of Southeast Asia and its neighborhood. There has been quite a few references to Quad in the discussions today. Of course, India is a member of Quad. Nonetheless, we should remember that the Quad and Indo-Pacific are not synonyms, and they should not be seen as one concept. Indo-Pacific is a conceptual construct. Quad is a framework for engagement between major countries in the region. Quad is one of the frameworks among many frameworks in the region, which includes trilaterals and other regional organizations. Quad can take up various activities to strengthen ASEAN centrality. In the recent past, Quad Plus has made some progress in this regard. Nonetheless, activities undertaken to ensure ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific will contribute to greater consensus between India and ASEAN. In the economic realm, ASEAN is keen on economic integration, ensuring financial stability and resilience. Indian leadership also articulated similar objectives of strengthening rule-based, open, balanced trade environment in the Indo-Pacific region. While there is consensus on the larger principles, there is considerable work to be done in terms of mechanics of regional economic integration. This was evident in India's reluctance to join the RCEP framework. The commonality between India and ASEAN in the economic realm can be further strengthened by working together, specifically on generating common positions on non-tariff barriers, rules of origin, auto-trigger mechanisms to combat anti-dumping activities in the regional framework. Such kind of work will further strengthen the consensus between India and ASEAN in the regional frameworks. Despite RCEP experience, the Southeast Asian countries in India are willing to explore new regional economic engagements, which is evident in their participation in Indo-Pacific economic frameworks. The Indo-Pacific economic framework seeks to focus on boosting the flows of trade, of commerce, investments, and it focuses on supply chain and other governance issues such as anti-corruption. It is important that Indo-Pacific countries, including ASEAN, should think about not only short-term efficiencies, but also long-term resilience. At the bilateral level, India-ASEAN trade is about 98.39 billion during 2021-22, around 100 billion. There is, of course, as many speakers pointed out, considerable space for improvement. This could be achieved, for instance, India's Make in India program is picking up momentum. For instance, because of production-linked incentives, global mobile manufacturing companies have invested and scaled up their investments in India. In 2022, it is expected this sector will grow at 24 to 26%. Similarly, automobile sector and its parts components is also attracting significant investments. The possibilities of exploring interlinkages with Southeast Asian production networks should be further explored. While working on new technologies for deeper consensus in the economic realm, in India and ASEAN should work on specifics of fair trade, as I pointed out earlier, such as addressing non-tariff barriers, rules of origin, to seize new opportunities that are going to come in Indian economy as it continues to grow from strength to strength in near future. In the security realm, there has been a growing deepening of India-Southeast Asia partnership, especially the defense relationship. India-Vietnam defense relationship is well known. Recently, just a few months ago, joint vision statement of India-Vietnam defense partnership was towards 2030 was signed. There is a $500 million credit line and capacity building programs are in place. Interestingly, in the recent past, India has scaled up defense partnerships with other countries as well. As was pointed out by earlier speaker, there is a lot of reports regarding India selling BrahMos missiles to Philippines and other countries. It has been reported that Malaysia may purchase India's light combat aircraft for its fighter jet programs. India has comprehensive strategic partnership with Indonesia. India is also keen to develop deep sea port in Sabang, and Aceh, Andaman, Nicobar Island connectivity has assumed greater priority. In addition to bilateral activities, India-ASEAN countries are deepening their cooperation in multilateral and naval exercises. There is another important area that needs to be understood in terms of security collaboration. Going forward, in my opinion, ASEAN countries and India should explore possibilities of sharing their experiences in contesting gray zone violations. If we examine the recent past, India has demonstrated a more proactive role in contesting gray zone territorial violations. How about exchanging notes on these issues? Such appreciation of security responses will deepen the overall political strategic consensus between India and ASEAN. To sum up, there is consensus between India and ASEAN on the larger principles of regional cooperation. However, it is the specifics of operationalizing free trade and balance of power that require a little more attention. It is in ASEAN's interest that Asia becomes more multipolar rather than bipolar. If that is so, ASEAN and India should exchange views on multipolarity and multi-alignment strategies. There has been a lot of reference to multi-alignment strategies. Multi-alignment implies that there is multipolarity. If there is multipolarity, then the policies of both these players, they should interrogate themselves if they are maintaining the multipolarity in the global landscape, or are they leaning towards one power or the other? If that is the case, then it will result in increased bipolarity. At least from an Indian perspective, there is, speaking for India, there has been phenomenal emphasis on multipolarity in India. In the recent past, we have engaged with United States, Israel, United Arab Emirates, I2, U2. In the India's immediate neighborhood, we have BIMSTEC framework. We have been Operation Sagar, Project Sagar, and other projects are being initiated. We have multiple frameworks of engagement extending from Mongolia to Fiji. Of course, our relationship with United States and others is also increasing. It is important that ASEAN also focuses on building and further strengthening its multipolarity approach to ensure that Indo-Pacific remains a multipolar area instead of giving into grand strategies such as G2 condominium and other areas. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Very much, Mr. Sanjay Pulipaka, for bringing us again, the idea of how to go ahead in terms of building our cooperation, regional cooperation. Particularly, I think you try to define, which I agree very much, consensus building or building consensus in our partnership, which is not always very easy, but it needs time, it needs patience. Even you look at ASEAN, and you know yourself the story of how ASEAN had been developed over the years, and ASEAN consensual way of doing things very much work in progress. So we say very much a work in progress, and of course, agenda, unfinished agenda, we'll be talking about it because of ongoing development. And this touching upon as well the ASEAN-India, the agenda of regional cooperation. I think very much also on the some of the things that you also try to bring to us. It's important to look at some of the concrete areas where our cooperation could stand out, as well as ongoing, development that we need also to adapt. Regional supply chain, we talked earlier, but I think we talk in terms of resilience, so it's efficiency of the supply chain, which in fact India was not yet in. That a lot of trade economists, even in India itself, try to also think that this is also, the ASEAN have been working over the years, and ASEAN wish very much India to be in, as happened, or ASEAN. So we said that, well, 2019 at ASEAN summit in Bangkok, well, we do not feel like India to miss a train, but we understand also from Indians' own, domestic issues with regard to more protected sector and some, that's some, that areas that you might need also time to adjust. But we hope very much that there could be a new development in this area. So India could more come into the scene. I think that I would like to, as time goes by very quickly, I would like to invite the third speaker, our last speaker, Dr. Temjenmeren Ao, Research Fellow at ICWA from Delhi, our host to have his floor now. Please. Are you there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and a very good evening to all the rest of the panelists. So my presentation is based on my working paper titled India and Southeast Asia, Building Regional Consensus for Greater Cooperation. So what I'll do for this presentation is I will just list out some of the issues that were examined in this paper. So in the post-Cold War period, India intensified her effort for regional cooperation by redefining her border. So the focus of India's foreign policy shifted from South Asia to Southern Asia, that included Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia. In its effort for building regional cooperation, India undertook the strengthening of existing organization by introducing new initiatives. It also took membership into regional organizations such as ASEAN. And finally, it also undertook measures to strengthen a new organization and introduce new initiatives, and took a more proactive role in a way towards establishing new organizations and initiatives. So the shift can be easily explained by the domestic and the international changes in the post-Cold War period, and by the larger gains that India expected, not only in terms of economics, but also in terms of strengthening its political, cultural, and security partnership with countries in Southeast Asia. So in the post-Cold War period, India's relation with ASEAN and with countries in Southeast Asia was first redrawn through the Lucky's policy, which really helped strengthen India's economic relations with individual Southeast Asian countries. And the announcement of the ACI's policy in 2014, it also provided the much necessary push to further propel the relations. Further, as also mentioned by a previous speaker, the establishment of the strategic partnership with ASEAN in 2012 also further deepened and broadened the area of our partnership to include the area of security and defense. And at the 18 ASEAN-India Summit last year in October, there is an agreement towards moving towards a India-ASEAN comprehensive strategic partnership. And while India's engagement with Southeast Asia has in the post-Cold War period has been mainly structured through ASEAN. In the last 3 decades, through its deepening of its partnership with ASEAN by engaging in various ASEAN-led mechanisms, it has also enabled India to strengthen its relation with individual Southeast Asian countries, with each of whom today India shares a very unique relation. For instance, India today has a comprehensive strategic partnership with Vietnam and with Indonesia. It has a strategic partnership with Singapore, an enhanced strategic partnership with Malaysia. And likewise, with other Southeast Asian countries, over the decades, it has been able to deepen its political as well as its security cooperation. For instance, with Thailand, it is an important regional partner for India, with whom India cooperates at various regional organizations such as ASEAN, the East Asia Summit, as well as at various sub-regional groupings such as the Mekong Ganga, the IORA, and so forth. As also mentioned by our previous speaker, one of the key areas of India-Southeast Asia cooperation is today emerging in the maritime space. India and ASEAN countries are cooperating to establish a mechanism towards addressing the various challenges that are emerging from traditional as well as non-traditional security threats. For India, since its historical engagement with Southeast Asia has been by sea, and today most of its foreign trade into countries in Southeast Asia, China, Korea, Japan, the United States, and the Americas. It goes through the Malacca Straits into the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Therefore, maritime security and the safety of the sea lines of communication is an important factor in terms of India's regional and bilateral cooperation, as it is essential towards uh, uh, promotion of trade, commerce, as well as securing its energy lines. And also it addresses issues of security, including natural disasters, HDR, and so forth. So Southeast Asia, as already been mentioned, is today at the center of the emerging Indo-Pacific construct, which is today witnessing a great power rivalry amongst the major powers that are competing for power as well as influence in the region. The emerging geopolitical contestation that we are witnessing today in the Indo-Pacific between the major powers is also leading to an increased militarization of the sea. The United States, in its report by the Department of Defense on the Indo-Pacific, explicitly claimed that the Indo-Pacific is Pentagon's priority theater. And the report also sharpened the idea that the United States and China are engaged in a long-term struggle for power and influence in the Indo-Pacific region. So the emerging geopolitical competition that we are witnessing in this region today is also resulting in other external powers towards increasing their military footprints in the region and building new alliances. The establishment of the trilateral alliance between Australia, the UK, and the United States in September 2021 is one such military alliance which is intended to address some of the emerging complexities in the Indo-Pacific. Many of the countries in Southeast Asia are concerned that this may lead to further arms race in the region, and it will also provoke other countries in the region to act more aggressively. There's also fears that the establishment of these military alliances could also heighten the possibility of countries in the region exploring the nuclear weapons as part of their national defense deterrence. So for India, Southeast Asia is central to its vision of a free, inclusive, and open Indo-Pacific. India's approach to the Indo-Pacific is encapsulated in forums like the Security and Growth for All, SAGAR, and the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative. Through them, India looks at engaging with its Indo-Pacific partners, either bilaterally, unilaterally, or through various multilateral forums, such as the IORA, IONS, and it wants to partner on a multitude of issues, including maritime security, blue economy, maritime connectivity, capacity building, and so forth. The IPY, which was announced in 2019 by the Indian Prime Minister at the 14th East Asia Summit, is aimed at building cooperation through consensus in light of the emerging differences and challenges that we are witnessing today in the Indo-Pacific. Therefore, India has emphasized on the need for building a cooperative and consultative framework through the IPY, and Southeast Asia can look into collaborating with India under any of the 7 pillars of the IPY. The cooperative framework envisaged through the IPY shares complementarities with the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific's broad areas of cooperation, which includes connectivity, achieving the UN's SDG goals 2030, and also the broader area of economics. So the synergy that we can see between the IPOI and the AOIP, which stresses on building partnership for a free trade and sustainable use of marine resources, it becomes would further enhance the scope of the India-Southeast Asia partnership, which becomes ever more crucial in the post-pandemic economic recovery. Another aspect that I would like to cover before I conclude is the part is the fact that apart from ASEAN, India has also taken a more proactive role today through in the region through Quad. Much has already been said about Quad in the previous session, and this is an arrangement between four countries. It is a dialogue mechanism in which these countries want to build on their vision of an open, free, inclusive, and a resilient Indo-Pacific. As already brought out in the previous sessions, in recent years, the agenda of Quad has become more broad-based, and it includes developmental linked initiatives, which is to drive and ensure common good. The pandemic, which has brought health to the forefront of the Quad agenda, in response to the ever-changing challenges in the region. At the summit in September 2021, it has put forward ambitious initiative to advance practical cooperation to address the challenges of the 21st centuries. These include ending the pandemic by increasing production and access to safe and effective vaccines, promoting higher standard infrastructure, combating climate change issues, partnering on emerging technologies, space, cyber security, and so forth. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the IPAC, which was announced at the recently held Quad Summit in June, where India and 7 ASEAN countries have agreed to join this framework. And while India and countries continue to review the IPAC, we may find some convergence amongst the 4 pillars under IPAC's enhanced economic security, enhanced economic engagement. So one of the pillars under IPAC is economic resilience, and India and Southeast Asian countries could look into cooperation under this, which would help build a resilient supply chain, which would protect the Indo-Pacific region from disruption and inflationary pressures, which have become ever more prevalent in the post-pandemic period, and which continues to get accelerated because of the ongoing global development. With this, I would stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Temjenmeren, for your presentation. I think you bring again a lot of issues by reviewing our past relationship up to many recent discussion on global and regional change that impact our partnership. I think it's perhaps bringing the last point that you try to, talking to us, that's on one part that seems to be India and ASEAN try to work very hard within the scope of Indo-Pacific. But again, in the big picture is rivalry, starting from, that the US and China have been linking on for some years. And with Ukraine and Russia war is also bring China, that how this work with Russia, while India also have relationship with Russia within the BRICS. And on the other hand, also the US, try to work a new alliance in that particular framework with the EU, in particular with Europe. And that's why ASEAN and India probably should see this as opportunities to working further, and that with the global and regional changes that will impact our regional cooperation. So of course, there are various points that you have been outlined about the how to make the synergy between both sides, and I agree very much that this is some point that we could maybe perhaps discuss more later in this session. Without further ado, I think now is we have around maybe 20 minutes for discussion. But before I open the discussion to the floor, I do not know whether we have questions from the floor. I would like to ask the organizer if there are any questions or are there any comments from the floor. Professor Prabir, you think we have any
Yeah,
question for the floor right now?
From the virtual floor, we found no question, but there are three important papers and three eminent scholars, Professor Moorthy, then Dr. Sanjay and Dr. Temjen. The question that I'd like to put, to all the three speakers, while they have given a very interesting suggestions from all of them, that how to build a synergy in ASEAN and India, and given that what Sanjay said, Mr. Pulipaka, that the term he used, multipolar alignments. Now, the questions to all of to Dr. Moorthy, Sanjay himself, and Dr. Temjen, that within multipolar alignments, and this also came out in the previous sessions as well, how do you look at the ASEAN centrality? So is it going to change, or is it changing already? Because in some of the initiatives which Mr. Pulipaka said, like in the IPEF, we don't find all 10 ASEAN, or some of the programs that which are purely strategic and security related. Some of the ASEAN countries are even not there in everywhere. So what exactly is going to happen, in, say, a way forward? How do you look at an ASEAN house? Will that be in order, or this will be divided or fragmented? If they are together, again, because it is the third largest market next to China, India, and then if they are not, the countries which are landlocked, island locked, they are ocean locked, they are going to face several challenges beyond their other, the day-to-day, their crises they have been facing. So this is what, I'd like to know from all three of them quickly, maybe, the time they have within themselves. So, Mr. Chair, so this is from the floor in physical, in-person format in ICWA. I do not know if anybody here has any questions. So, yeah, thank you.
If not anyone asking yet the question or comments, I would like to pass on directly to Mr. Sanjay and perhaps other two speakers to Professor Prabir comments and questions. Sanjay, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Prabir. It's a very good question, actually. During the Cold War, despite many hotspots in different parts of the world, the core dispute or the conflict was in the European theater between the communist bloc and the capitalist bloc. So that's the Cold War, where two European ideologies were contesting. And of course, there were hotspots across the world. In the post-Cold War, what we are seeing is the power shift that has happened towards the larger East Asian region. And it is therefore the Southeast Asia and India and countries like that have become the core of the new geopolitical dynamic that is emerging. We are having difficulty in defining what this post-Cold War is, right? I mean, we are defining the current world order as post-Cold War. as if it is something that has followed. This is what Bilahari Kausikan has pointed out. We still are not able to define the era that we are living in. But in terms of actual power dynamic, Southeast Asia has become the vortex of the new power dynamic that is evolving. So therefore, there will be more and more powers that will be coming into Southeast Asia and its neighborhood. So therefore, it becomes very important for Southeast Asia and ASEAN to engage with these new dynamics. And a lot will be dependent, whether it is the Quad or whether it is the new AUKUS, whether it is IPAF, all these things, a lot will depend on how ASEAN will navigate these new power dynamics. Why? Because the power shift has happened and ASEAN suddenly finds itself at the core or the vortex of new power dynamic. The question now is, we are all looking at ASEAN. If ASEAN has to maintain its centrality, how will it engage with these new major powers? It just cannot say, please don't come, because that is the nature of power. When there is a power dynamic that is at play on this scale, other powers will come. So a lot will depend on ASEAN leadership and their ability to play this game. Not only within the Southeast Asia, but also in the adjoining regions and how they shape it up. So it is for them to act now. So how do they become more inclusive of major powers? Do they have capacity to keep away the powers away from the region? The emergence of various frameworks shows it is not possible. They have to engage with new powers, new frameworks, because they are at the core of the evolving power dynamic. And it is, as I pointed out, for ASEAN countries to decide. Of course, there are countries like India and others who value ASEAN, and they are willing to work with ASEAN. And there are many ways in which we can strengthen ASEAN in terms of its defense capabilities. We have no territorial issues with major ASEAN countries. We have no ambitions there. And we are looking at whether ASEAN will rise up to this new challenge. Then one of the examples that is playing out is Myanmar, what is happening. It has both domestic and international dimension. ASEAN has taken something, a new position on Myanmar, unlike the previous decades. And we are looking at ASEAN leadership to prod the various actors within Myanmar to find solutions to the evolving crisis there, because it will have regional implications. So what will happen to ASEAN because of these various frameworks will be contingent on whether ASEAN recognizes that it is at the core of new power dynamic that is shaping the global order. Thank you.
To add to Mr. Sanjay, I think it's nice to say that well, the ASEAN has to lead, and ASEAN centrality is very important. Right, to remind you also, you know, that by the turn of the century, the beginning of the first century, ASEAN used to discuss very much as well when we start to see how we would like to deal with the emerging Asia, you know, major players like China, India, in addition to Japan or Korea, you know, so very much. In addition, of course, to also the US and the EU, Australia, New Zealand, all that, you know. So we always try to project us like in, you know, like we are in the driver's seat, you know, like the driver, and you have many passengers, big or small, but mostly they are big, right? So we are the driver, and how to reach the destination. So that's something not very easy always. And the up to today, when you say that's about the rivalry or superpower, so we try to say that we cannot choose side. We not like to choosing side. So that's in you know, that's in difficult position. But I think India understands us very much. But we don't want to pushing by China, and neither the US or other countries. So I think is in this area, ASEAN and India have a good understanding, and that's something that trustful relationship that we build over the years, you know, that can overcome. Because if you ask today, you know, the kind of the trust country, China ranking the lowest, right? Cannot be trustful since we have South China Sea, the problems, and many countries, all the claimant countries from Vietnam to Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, all that, So they're very much looking into the difficult position. And of course, we also have in the Mekong region, if you're talking about Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, we're also in difficult position how to deal with China or the upper part of Mekong. So that's why one part that if we see that India also have the experience of what you call the what you call the level or the kind of thing that Professor Babir tried to raise earlier. So I think we should try to explore more how to work on this particular area so we can move it forward. ASEAN about to try to lead, but we also need to have the support, in that kind of driver's seat, which is still very much in our mind. Thank you. I would like to ask the next two speakers, would you like to add now to the discussion? Dr. Ravichandran? Yeah, for Malaysia. For Malaysia.
Thank you. Very interesting observation from Professor Prabir. It is true. See, we must understand that ASEAN is essentially a Cold War construct, right? It came about in the 1960s after several attempts of regional integration, primarily to deal with the geopolitics of that time. Okay, countries were in loggerheads with each other. All right, Malaysia had problems with Indonesia, with the Philippines. And this was the time that ASEAN came about, as an experiment. But what is important for us to recognize in ASEAN is the dynamism and pragmatism of ASEAN. I think that makes it one of the probably more successful regional organization in the world. Okay, and it has managed relations in the region among nation states, among countries, and also with regions, with other countries, with other major powers as well. The one important factor is the concept of, consensus, which is some blame to be, it is too longish, and there is no decisive decision. It takes years in terms of talking and negotiation before a decision can be made. Yes, it is true in that that was the nature of decision making in ASEAN. But having said that, I think ASEAN has evolved. I don't say it has evolved tremendously, but also in small steps. And we have seen in the case of the position taken by some countries, Malaysia especially, with regard to the Myanmar issue, as well as ASEAN with regard to the Myanmar issue as well. With regard to the ASEAN concept of centrality, actually the concept of centrality came about in the post-1997 financial crisis. It was then, we found that we were no longer the tigers of Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. We lost our tooth. We couldn't bite economically. We were badly affected. Then there was this recalibration in terms of how we want to keep it relevant. With the rising China, and we were no longer as attractive as before in terms of economic and investment. Right. So I think that was the thing. And this concept of centrality gained traction because if you look at within the region and also in the Northeast Asia region, there were not really any credible framework to manage relations, especially in the politics in that realm. Then ASEAN offered itself, all right, with what we call the ASEAN-led processes. As India has been very active. The ARF, the ASEAN Regional Forum process, the East Asia Summit process, the multiple engagement process, and all that. And that and all the major players, major powers were members in one other form of ASEAN-led processes. I think that is the concept of centrality in the minds of ASEAN, is to keep itself relevant. And in many issues, although they have not been successful in some important ones, they were unified in a particular stand. In fact, in South China Sea issue, they were actually quite unified until quite recently in Hanoi. They couldn't, because countries like Cambodia and also Laos did not want to take the position, because one is a landlocked country, another one survives because of Chinese currency. You see? So I think that is the position of this. In terms of reconfiguration, the internal challenges, I think the concept of centrality is something that ASEAN wants to push forward to keep itself relevant. To what extent it can do in the concept of multipolarity that my colleague Kwik Cheng Chui mentioned in his presentation, and also the others have mentioned the concept of multipolar engagement. It is something that we have to watch and see. But again, ASEAN is also embraces not only on bilateral but also with regional organizations. All right. And if you look at it, the concentric circle that goes around ASEAN is multiple, in fact. All right. So I think the dynamism in ASEAN is there. I think the ASEAN can evolve, to manage the region better. That's my point of view.
Thank you very much.
Just to
yeah.
Just to add, not much.
Okay, please. Please.
Thank you, Chair.
Please, okay.
Not much to add. Much has already been said, and I do agree with all the panelists who talked about ASEAN centrality remains intact. It's quite evident what is happening. We have countries re-engaging with the region, given the emerging geopolitical churn that we're witnessing. This one thing, in terms of the consensus, we need to keep in mind there are many things that come into play that in a way, and while ASEAN has been in the forefront in setting the agenda, the consensus building in a way takes things, because a lot of interplay. Like if you look at the 5-point consensus towards addressing the ongoing issue in Myanmar, while ASEAN was quick towards quick in coming into and bringing that consensus, it has a lot of elements, external elements that that came into play, that as a consequence of which the 5-point agreement consensus, we're not seeing it as being as successful as it could have been. So yes, I do agree with all of the points made, because while the centrality remains intact, question always comes on the consensus and the ASEAN way, which in a way becomes one of its major hindrance towards addressing key critical issues. Yeah, thank you.
In fact, this is also remind me the discussion among the ASEAN countries. That you're right to mention after the Asian financial crisis, and again I mentioned about the turn of the century, and I think we had around 2003 when we started to stem out the so-called the next stage of ASEAN integration before we have ASEAN Charter, ASEAN community building. So this is also a core concept which came out at the right time. So by then, I think although ASEAN strategy seems to be very much on the security, giving the stability to ASEAN and all that, but I think it's also to keep in mind that we're talking about the ASEAN centrality to keep ASEAN unity and diversity, which is also the central part of ASEAN Charter. Although the word itself and the concept have been advanced in terms of the region building, and I think become more familiarized or understood by our strategic partners. Of course, India is a real supporter, I could say, for that. And I think that's why, because when I mentioned about the driver's seat, that would be not the good image, but maybe you're talking about ASEAN centrality. That's something to build forward. So that's why that kind of double image kind of thing that we have to keep in mind as well while we discuss about the ASEAN centrality. You know, ASEAN would like to work everyone, and this session concern very much about building consensus. And I think this is also another way of understanding consensual way of ASEAN in building, you know, that future agenda. So with that, I think if there are no further question, no further comments, I think the session could come to the end. I don't know, Professor Pabir, would you like to add something?
No, nothing. It's perfect. The session has come out very well. And I thank, we have no questions from the floor here. So we thank on behalf of the organizers, to the chair, you, Professor Suthiphand, all the speakers, and also the speaker who could not turn up. And we wish a quick recovery, Dr. Anupama. And we thank all of you for joining. And we'll be in touch after the conference for the proceedings. Thank you very much. We close the session today, this time. And tomorrow we start at 10 o'clock morning Indian Standard Time. Those who are attending in virtual format, please keep this in time in your engagement. So 10 o'clock we start. So maybe you would like to come back by 5 minutes before to 10. So thank you very much, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.